So it sounds like you're talking about, though, a ripple effect that can occur that we can draw directly back to this issue around food versus fuel. I mean, you used the example, you spoke specifically or directly about corn in the context of Chipotle and some of the ripple effects that may have. And I'm wondering, Sasanka, if you can talk about this and the food versus fuel context and on a global level. You started to do it in talking about the poorest of the poor who can't absorb the kinds of shocks when you see prices going up and down.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just very much to echo what Carolyn said in her intervention, that the renewable fuel standard is not the cause of sole cause of global hunger. It's a contributing factor, and it's very much interrelated to climate shocks, to pressures on land. There are a range of other factors, and it's incredibly complicated. As you said, there are trade-offs. Two sort of relevant examples that come to mind, sort of at a national sort of macro level, and then getting right down to sort of direct impacts on people. I think I painted a picture of the impacts that corn has, and I like the term you use, complementary commodities, because corn in many ways is one of those complementary commodities, because as the price of that goes up, so too do grains, wheat, soybeans. They're used as substitution crops. If it's too expensive for corn, then farmers then use these other crops for feedstocks. So there's very, very real impacts on global food price spikes. And as I said, this has direct impacts on developing countries who import corn's budgets. An example which was particularly striking for me was, I think in Guatemala, there was very clear evidence to show directly based on the corn price spikes, just from the US. This is the US exporting to Guatemala. They had I'm trying to remember the exact number now, I think it was just in 1 year alone in 2010, a $28 million increase in what they import in corn. Now, this was equivalent to the entire food aid budget that the US provided, and 6 times of the agricultural budget. So, I mean, these are huge sort of implications for countries which are really, really struggling to feed themselves. And I guess just to drill down really much further, that global monitoring report I mentioned, which looked at the impact of food price spikes on the poorest, Oxfam together with I'm forgetting the name of the organization now. It was an international development organization. We did a case study looking at the direct impacts on women in local communities, in various listening posts is what we call them, just to really understand how they struggled to sort of feed the families, because in a lot of the rural communities, the primary caregivers are women, and a lot of the burdens then increase upon themselves. They've got, if they can't afford food that they are trying to purchase, they've got to travel further off, they've got to gather further firewood, they put themselves in harm's way. And there was a direct correlation in the 2011 price spikes in particular with women's livelihoods. And that was particularly telling, just to sort of say that it's not so much of an abstraction in terms of what happens here influencing down in other parts of the world, but there are real sort of tangible links that you can draw upon.
And I wanted to, picking up on that, we've described some of the ways that people are losing or getting the short end of the stick, but I wanted to come back, Joel, to what you were saying at the top of the conversation, what you wanted people to walk away with. And you were painting, I think, a picture of kind of a mega battle that's happening with agribusiness and with big fuel, and you were pointing to, I think, or what I heard was to kind of a mano-a-mano battle that's going on between those two. But I wanted to get a sense from you of who else do you think is winning and losing in this battle?
I think the real winners are grain traders and commodity brokers. I reject the assumption that the only thing setting food prices in the world are the traditional laws of economic supply and demand. And for all our talk about ethanol, we haven't talked about the role of oil in food prices. There's no question that petroleum has a huge impact on food prices. And when oil goes up and then food prices go up, the food companies say we had no choice. But I notice the food prices often don't go down when oil prices go down. So the grain traders, much of this, are making the same money. And I strongly support Oxfam's work to change U.S. international aid policy. I know a big priority of the Obama administration to stop rewarding just some shipping companies and some American grain traders. But I do think that the bigger issue is that many of these sides stood idly by or supported a farm bill that just cut $8.7 billion out of food for low-income Americans in a bill that was basically an orgy of corporate welfare. It claimed it was reforming agriculture subsidies, when basically it was just renaming stuff and shuffling them, and claiming, oh my goodness, we're going to reduce the deficit, when this bill, it didn't really reduce the deficit, just made more money available for corporate welfare and tax breaks for the rich. So for me, these are important discussions, but again, I'm still talking about the real life impact of this. This November 1st, because of a bill that was passed a few years ago, the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Bill, every food stamps recipient in America lost money, an average of $30. I met a woman with 2 kids putting herself through CUNY who lost $45 a month, and that's $45 less each month that she has to feed her family. The pantries and kitchens can't possibly keep up. This has catastrophic impacts on our educational system, catastrophic impacts on our healthcare. It's costing our society $167 billion a year, according to a study from the Center for American Progress. So I just wish the other sides would be a little more united in really fighting for ensuring, if they're really concerned about hunger, that an adequate safety net's there. And wages are there, that we raise the minimum wage to ensure that people working full-time and playing by the rules can earn enough to feed their families.
And Carolyn, thinking again about the food versus fuel aspect of this, one of the interesting things here, because I think we often think, well, the food and farming communities would be aligned on this, but I was wondering if you could talk some about the split and bringing both your economic lens as well as your expertise on food to what's happening there and why.
I mean, I think this kind of dovetails off a little bit what Joel was talking about, how supply and demand don't necessarily work in the marketplace. And I mean, I think that supply and demand do work in the marketplace, but one thing that we tend to overlook is the market power held by some large companies in different places in the food system. And because of that, you have what we call like sticky price transmission, where retail prices are quick to go up as costs go up, but they don't seem to fall quite as quickly. There's a much longer lag. So I think part of this story is that like at the farm level, and it's not often that I'm the most conservative person on the panel, but I appear to be that way tonight. So I mean, at the farm level, I find that farmers in general, speaking generally, have very little market power. Even though there is a great influence over the commodity programs, so I'll just put that aside. But the role of the food company, I think, can't be understated in terms of distributing the types of food that are available and the prices that people are paying for the food and the prices farmers receive for the food. And so somehow, maybe our society seems to be okay with the concept that we'll let that type of market power exist, yet at the same time, we're going to either have poorly funded anti-poverty programs sort of compensating for the fact that the distribution of income is predicated upon a few companies having a lot of price-setting ability. So I'm sure Joel has something to say to that.
I don't understand why you thought what you said was anyway not conservative. I agree 1,000% with the average rank and file farmers have virtually no political power. And I think it's also an important point, there is no monolithic agriculture.
Right.
The average small family farmer is an entirely different boat than Archer Daniels Midland.
Yeah.
Okay. So we settled that.
Yeah.
We've settled it
peace and
as
harmony
well
back
as
to the
we can
table.
in sound bites, yeah.
Well, but